Welcome back. Thanks for joining. Please like, share, and subscribe. I definitely need the subscriptions. And please share it. That's how I get more subscribers, I guess. Anyway, thanks again for joining. I do appreciate it. And I do like the comments, so keep hitting the comment button if you have something you want to add or a question. Today, I've got a lot of get my butt in gear and get some stuff done because Atlas called and the transfer case is being built. I guess there is something different on an NV4500 mounting surface than other stuff. I think it's similar to a 700R4. I don't know. Anyway, they called to verify it was an NV4500 so that they made sure they put the right clocking ring on it. Anyway, I gotta get my butt in gear, so let's go. One of the best tools you can use doing these builds, tape measure. Putting the front axle in this. Now, I'm doing a little bit of modification. I'm flipping the axle, so instead of it being a spring under axle, it's gonna be a spring over axle. I'll explain that in just a second. But my biggest concern was the distance between the leaf springs and the centering pins. Kind of got lucky on this because the distance between the leaf spring centering pins is 37 inches and it's 37 inches on the axle too. So I literally do not have to relocate the perches on the front axle. All I have to do is flip the centering pins on my axle and kind of do a guesstimate on ride height. We're all kind of on the same page. Some people are new to this, some people have a lot of experience. So I wanted to go over a couple little items of terminology that you might hear quite a bit on some of these videos. First thing is, this is a leaf spring centering pin. It's got a round head on it, goes through the leaf springs, tightens it up, holds the leaf spring packed together. And then the pin will fit into a hole which is in your axle or spring perch. And it keeps it from moving front to back. And then of course the U-bolts squeeze everything together and create, a frictional tension so that it doesn't move. So first thing, centering pin. They come in a lot of different sizes, dimensions, widths, lengths. In a pinch, also, you can use a grade 8 bolt with the corners ground off of it. Now that we know what centering pins are, I just said I was flipping the axle from a spring under to a spring over. Now, if this is my leaf spring, which it is a leaf spring, if this is my axle tube, if the axle tube sits above the axle, it's called a spring under. If the axle tube is below the spring, it is called a spring over. And then on your axle, you would have some sort of a perch, which would then go into the centering pin, and then your U-bolts clamp. So that's what's meant by spring under, spring over. Now, when we're switching from a spring under to a spring over, you're going to gain a lot of height. And so I drew this, my spring under, springs under the axle, spring over, springs over the axle. No big deal there. When you move from one to the other, the distance between axle center to axle center is the actual height you're gaining. Now on this Dana 60 I'm putting in the Army truck, that's gonna give me pretty close to 6 to 8 inches of gain on my height. Now remember, I flipped the shackle in the rear axle, which gave me about between 4 and 5 inches. Plus, now on this front axle, I've got leaf springs that are tall. Plus, I'm gonna flip the axle, so I'm gonna gain a bunch of height. So what I did initially is I removed 3 leaves out of the spring pack. So I brought it down to 4 leaves. And these are 2 of the leaves that came out of it. So when I am flipping this axle, I had to move my spring pin, which was up here. I had to turn it over so it was below. That way it gave that axle something to lock into. Height-wise, I'm taking a guess. So on the leaf springs, I'm going to start by taking 3 leaves out, and I will leave 4, and then we'll see where my ride height sits, and I may have to add one back in later. Just like on the rear springs, I pressed new brass bushings into the shackles, and then I pressed in the bushings to the front leaf springs, which on these are more traditional. They're a rubber type of a bushing, and then just put the springs in the vehicle, bolt them down, and now I just lower it down onto the housing sitting on a set of jack stands. Next up, some bolt-in hardware. Of course, clean up everything and repaint it, and I'm sure I'll have to do that again once I do a shock mount. But the right side of this axle bolted into the original plate, so I didn't have to use U-bolts, just regular bolts. The left side I used traditional U-bolts, but I did have to grind a groove in the housing for the inner. I am running an ARB air locker in this Dana 60 in the front end of this thing. However, I'm not going to do a video within this video on how to do the Dana 60 ARB, because I already have a video on putting a ARB in a Dana 60. So no sense in doing video within a video within a video or something like that. So if you're interested in how the Dana 60 goes in and how an air locker goes in, just go back a few videos and take a look at that one. Otherwise, onward. Now, on the agenda are some really good upgrades for the outers on this Dana 60. I'm going to tear everything down, pull the knuckles off, pull the axle shafts out. I'm going to start with upgrading the outer axle shafts to a 35 spline alloy axle, which is far stronger than the original 31 spline OEM axle. I'm going to upgrade the U-joints in these axles to a Spicer forged U-joint, which in my opinion, on the streetable end of the U-joint world, I think they're probably the strongest ones out there for this application. Obviously, there are some off-road specific ones that are stronger, but these are very streetable and strong, so you kind of have to find that happy medium for your build. Next thing I'm going to do on this, while I have this all apart, is put new ball joints in the knuckles, since this is a ball joint front end and we're going to replace them. The cool part of this particular upgrade is on the right side knuckle, I am going to upgrade this knuckle to a high steer knuckle, meaning I'm going to have to figure out how to install a high steer arm on the top of the right side knuckle. Now, through some research, I found this really nice high steer arm online. It's from a company called Skies Off-Road Design. It's a really heavy duty steering arm. Now, when you purchase this steering arm from them, they recommend you send in your right side knuckle to them, and they will machine the top of it, drill it and tap it to accept the high steer arm. Me being the glutton for punishment that I am, and I always want to try to see if I can do stuff myself, I figure that's how I learn, is I'll screw something up really good. Hopefully I won't do that, because if I screw this up, I'll have to buy a new knuckle and then have it sent in and have it machined. But I'm going to try to do the little machine work here in my shop without any machining equipment. There's a few tricks to that, and most of it's just thinking out of the box. So that's what I'm going to do, and we'll see how it goes. There's no harm in giving something a good old college try, and we'll see how that goes. So I used to just hammer on these and beat them out, but I discovered a ball joint press a while back, and it sure makes life a lot easier when you're doing these. Saves you a lot of headache. one down, flip it around, and we'll do this one. I say flip it around, but it actually faces the same way. You just move everything over. The nice part about this tool is you can also use it to press everything back in. And that's that. So now that I've got this knuckle stripped, the reason I'm doing this is I need to cut and machine the top of this off, drill, tap, mount this high steer arm to, which will clear the leaf springs. Part one, I strapped this cutoff wheel on my angle grinder to a board. That way I could try to run the knuckle across it as flat as possible. Once I got that part done, I cleaned it up and cut that little corner out of the caliper hanger. Once I got that piece cut out and it was straight, then I had to do a little bit of cleanup on some parts that really didn't come out that good on my homemade jig, but it was pretty darn close considering. Once I got this part of it, I used a flapper disc to clean up, smooth out, and do a little more fine tuning on making sure this knuckle top was flat. And I used a square, and then I also would set the high steer arm on it and make sure it didn't rock. Once I got it really close, out comes the flat file, and I probably spent a good hour flat filing this, cleaning up a couple little corners when I noticed something didn't fit right, but by the time I was done, this thing fit absolutely perfect. I could set it on there. There was no rocking. There was no shifting. Now, center punch, drill holes, and tap the holes, and get it ready for our final test fit. So you can see how this came out. Slides right down, the cones fit right in. This stud here goes in much easier after it's set down because it has a step to it. The other thing I did, instead of using Loctite, I spot weld. Well, I pretty much do like a rose weld on the studs where they come through this housing. I don't want them coming loose ever. This last stud, I will do the same thing with it after it's on its final assembly. The other thing I think I am going to do too is weld where I've cut the brake out to allow a little more strength there. Plus, that can also help keep this from walking. I know this channel here creates somewhat of a keyway, but it's not a super tight fit. And now that it all fits, I torqued everything down, strategically welded where I thought it would be pertinent, and then we're ready for some paint and install. I think I'll call that a success. It'll work. And my normal flat black paint. Pressing the ball joints back in, I'm actually pulling them by pushing this, and it's pulling the ball joint in. You can see the end of the ball joint coming out here, so I don't have to worry about it bottoming out. My adapter's the right size, and then the other adapter cone is bigger than the seating point. So let's pull her in. Hear the tone change when it's seated all the way too. Joint, you want to line everything up correctly. Make sure you're straight. This will pull through. This will press it in. tone change when it's seated. I can also see this one. So. Voila. Something I would like to let people know, there is a rolled side and a sharp side on any of these snap rings. The sharp side goes towards the direction you are trying to retain. You don't want the rolled side towards that because it could actually roll over it. So just something I was taught that I thought was pretty cool in machine shop. Now on to the 35 spline chromoly outer axle shafts. These are substantially bigger, as you can see. Plus they're just flat out a lot stronger. While I'm doing these outer axle shafts, I'm also going to replace the U-joints with a Spicer forged U-joint. They're probably the strongest ones around for streetable use, not for full off-road, but streetable. First things first though, knock the C-clips out. Once the C-clips are out of the U-joint, then you just hammer the shafts off of the U-joint. This time I'm going to show you how I press them in with a press, but the reality is I rarely use a press when I'm doing this. Once the U-joint is pressed back in, install the new C-clips and visually check it to make sure they're seated, and then rotate the U-joint with the axle to make sure there's no binding spots. Once that's done, you're ready to go. This U-joint done and the axle shaft done. The other side I'm going to do all by hand, which is how I normally do them. First process is the same, knock the C-clips out and then hammer the axle shaft off of the U-joint. But instead of a press, you use the anvil of the vise to hold the caps, put the joint in, put the C-clips in as you go. Just be careful when you're doing this because it's real easy to knock needle bearings out, lose them, or break them. So this method you got to be careful. Now that axle shafts are done, slide them back into the housing. Add the dust seal or slinger, and then the outer seal goes over that. I also put the grease fittings and torque the ball joints at this point. All right, spindles are on. Now, getting to this point, got a new U-joint. I put a new slinger. There's a rubber seal that goes on the axle shaft, and these are the 35 spline axles. Then there's another seal to cover the bearing that's inside the spindle. Now, make sure you pack that bearing with some grease. Second thing is I always put a thin layer of grease on the flange assembly so that when you slide this in and out, it's a lot easier in the future because water tends to get in there and just rust the snot out of these. Take the time and actually torque the bolts and nuts on critical things like this. You know, it really doesn't matter if your glove box fell out because you mistorqued something. But when a spindle or something like a wheel is not torqued and then it either falls off or it breaks because it was over torqued, you know, this stuff can get serious. And the last part of this is packing wheel bearings, installing the wheel bearings, and I did buy a set of these G2 lockout hubs, which so far I really like them. They've got real positive engagement, they're easy to install, and they're all metal, so they ought to hold up okay. Now these are not a competition off-road lockout type hub, but I think for this application they'll be just perfect. Now that those are in, aside from plumbing, I put the brake hangers on, I put the brake calipers on with the new pads. Now, I'm not plumbing any of this yet. That'll come later when I do the rest of the brake. That's about all the time I have on this video for the front axle. About the only thing left to do is the tie rod end drag link and hydraulic steering assist, which has got a lot of detail in it as well. So we'll save that for another time. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. And we're going to do a transfer case next time. Thanks for watching. Great. Rock Junction, we're getting ready. People are rolling in, and should be a good day of trail runs. Get here early enough. Probably got 50 people lined up for trails. We've already had the Rangeley and the Montrose groups left. These are all going out to our local trails now. Got a small group today, which is okay with me. That makes it more fun on the trail. That's really good there. anything needed here. See, your rear end is off the ground. Just want to stay further to this side, so you need to bail. You're way off the ground.
Huh?
You're way off the ground.
Well, how fast are you going to come down?
Well, start turning this way. That's fun, isn't it? That long wheelbase is actually a helpful there. Boy, he's got nice travel on that. Really nice. It actually looks really good. Straighten it out if you want. Straighten it out here.
There you go.
That's okay. That's okay on a new build. Get the comfort level first. Stretch pretty good there. Wow. and then have me hold it. Hard driver. Hard driver, back up. Hard. A little bit more. Okay. Now as he starts coming forward, come past him.